This time's right. Are you ready, guys? Is everyone ready? Yeah. For real, let's go. Let's go. Oh God. Hello, and welcome to the 10th episode of Hack Unleashed, eventually live streaming from PlusX in Brighton, with a live audience who are over there, going to make some noise. So, as well as myself, John and Dom, we're joined by a special guest this week, Matt Hunter, co-CEO of PlusX, the lovely building that we're in today. And in today's session, we wanted to talk about the three subjects that are close to our heart. That's empowerment and thinking differently and getting people to achieve more. Matt's joined us to talk about that today. He's got a rich background in design, formerly a principal consultant at the world famous IDEO, and a teacher at the Royal College of Art, and chief design officer at the Design Council. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and PlusX?
Yeah, absolutely. So, co-chief executive of PlusX. There are two of us, and we'll kind of maybe explain why there are two of us later on. But because there are times when we're trying to do so much, we need a wide range of skills. So PlusX, I mean, it's a growing network of innovation hubs, and our mission is pretty simple. We're here to help, we say, ambitious businesses to grow. And really, if you think about it, the UK is a fantastic place in terms of its role in sort of science and innovation over the years. But actually, the world of entrepreneurship, someone saying, you know what, I'm going to create a company today, and I'm going to grow to be world-class and world-beating. You know, that's a relatively rare thing to happen. And it's even more rare that someone who says that can be anywhere but central London in the UK. You know, central London absolutely has that sort of gravity well. And so really we're here in regional cities around the UK more than anywhere to help that happen. And what happens when you do that, when you create these exciting businesses, you create fantastic jobs with decent pay. And so, you know, we just think it's something that's absolutely of its time. And we're really excited to have started it with our first big full-scale building here in Brighton. And it's really fresh as well, isn't it? It is. Well, I only just opened it. And let's face it, it's not the best economic environment and medical healthcare environment for us to launch. But you know, as with all businesses, we're having to kind of adjust what we do. But fundamentally, you know, what we're doing, we believe, is set up on some very long-term needs and some very long-term trajectories. So obviously the short term is bumpy for everyone, but in the medium to long term, we're pretty confident we've got the right offer.
I mean, we love it. We love the space.
Yeah, when you say it's pretty fresh, we were basically waiting on the doorstep for the first day we opened pretty much. So desperate to get out of lockdown into this beautiful building.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you here and everyone else. And I think that one thing that is so important is our sort of strategic partners, you and I, that sort of master planned this whole development in Preston Barracks and commissioned Studio Eva at West, fantastic architectural practice to make this building. They recognise the value of doing things at a world-class level. I mean, this is a world-class architecture firm making a fantastic building, hopefully one of the best that Brighton has got, both in terms of its architecture, but then in terms of its infrastructure as well. You know, we've got sort of multiple internet feeds coming into here, which means that if one goes down, you've got two others that are going to pick it up. So we're heading towards wide score platinum, which means, you know, I think the Shard and the Empire State Building are both wide score platinum. So yeah, you know, let's make things world class wherever the talent is, because they deserve it.
I mean, the internet is pretty impressive. Like,
It's really,
they put the 3D artists up, so I think I almost cried when you saw how good that makes sense. That was pretty good.
There are some apocryphal stories, I think, around WeWork, the infamous WeWork, where they were creating one of their first buildings. And I think at some point the air conditioning didn't work, and it was really hot. People carried on. And then the lavatories broke, and people kind of soldiered on. And then the internet broke, at which point it's the last of the building. So we know what matters, especially right now. It's such a crucial element to get right.
So, obviously, I kind of went through the introduction about your experience at work at IDEO, and I suppose a lot of design products and things like that. But how do you feel that that kind of experience has led you from where you were to this moment today?
Yeah, I think that I find that a really interesting question, because I think every single thing I've learned is required to make this a success. So, I was hugely lucky. I graduated from the Royal College of Art, understanding how to design physical and digital products, right? So that was pretty rare in 1994. So I got an internship in San Francisco, pretty good for the summer. And then a year later, when I graduated, I rang them up and said, "Have you got a job?" And they said yes. So I joined IDEO, which is a fantastic organisation, really creative, empowering, all those things. And I got to consult across the US in the whole Asia Pacific area, so in Korea and Japan and others. And then I spent 10 years back in the UK, consulting across Europe, occasionally working in the UK. Frankly, very rare to be doing innovation consulting in the UK. Anyway, the point is, what that taught me was not only what an amazing A-grade innovation culture would be like, because IDEO is fated for its culture with Harvard Business Review and others, but also what it's like to work across multiple sectors. So I was consulting in, healthcare one moment, office design the next, some obscure software thing the next minute. And so you understood innovation in multiple contexts. But after 15 years of doing that, I sort of felt like I wasn't quite doing what I wanted to do. So then I joined the Design Council, and so that was sort of working both in terms of understanding public services, how public service is different from all these sort of private sector innovations and gadgets, and also policy. What the hell does policy mean? I had to look up the word in the dictionary, frankly, before going to the internet. But what I'm sort of understanding there, I suppose, is how governments think about driving innovation and what they do and all the rest of it, which again is kind of important right now. But then also what I was working on was social impact. So there's also this question that everyone is quite familiar with. It's, why is it that the commercial world sometimes can sort of discount either negative environmental impacts or negative social impacts? So how do we think about innovation and social impact? And then finally, after sort of 5 years at the Design Council, I wanted to do something else, and I got lured into this world of regeneration, which is sort of very long-term thinking. But ultimately, again, that was really interesting. It's about innovation, it's about social impact, it's about collaboration with government. So actually what we do here is absolutely focus ourselves on commercial stuff. Oh, and I should say also, at the Design Council, I was supporting startups, so that's where I got into kind of accelerators and incubators. Yeah. But then really what I was doing at the Central Research Laboratory, which was the precursor to this, in West London, set up by you and I, again, our strategic partners, was understanding how to weave together the private sector, which is really good at sort of investing in and supporting these startups, the public sector, which recognises what it means for jobs and communities and sort of UK PLCs, as they say, and social impact. And then understanding how to make all this work across different sectors. And really when Paul Rostos, the co-chief executive of PlusX, and I took this concept on and decided to kind of propose a new business model to scale it up, rebrand it, call it PlusX, and go for funding and turn it into something even bigger, which is coming up 2 years ago now. We felt it was something that was sort of relevant for the whole country. And I think there was a moment when we began to see even a conservative government say, we need to level up, we need to look beyond London, because everyone had become so used to Silicon Valley and then London being the places of innovation. Now finally everyone was saying, this isn't enough. So I think, it's quite a long journey. It's been, whatever it is, 25 years of all of this stuff, but I feel like I'm using every single bit of my experience in order to weave something together for maximum impact.
I have a question. So co-CEO.
Yes.
How does that happen?
It's really interesting. So, Paul and I often say we come from very different backgrounds, right? So I'm a designer, right? Fluffy, probably, I don't know. But and Paul is a former banker, right? How could we be different, right? So he's an expert in raising capital. He was a former equity analyst. He began to get into the world of property through actually being involved in property finance. But even though on the face of it, we come from different business backgrounds, backgrounds, you could say, or sort of domain backgrounds, we have a similar passion. So Paul had also sort of formed his startup, and he says, got a badge of honour by failing in it, and sort of recognised he needed more support. I've been in the world of innovation. And we got crashed together, actually, by you and I, in trying to sort of take this central research laboratory concept and move it forward. And we just found that we had great chemistry. I mean, we're both, 50-ish, both got families, and I think actually, to some extent, that might count. Because when you've been through the mill a few times, been through a few recessions, you soften up a bit and you kind of go, okay, we are going to work hard. We do recognise that you've got to work bloody hard to make this stuff happen. But at the same time, stuff happens, and it's not the end of the world, and we'll get through this. So what I found, especially, is that when I was managing director of the Central Research Laboratory, responsible myself for that kind of prototype of PlusX, with a great team, but we were underfunded and under-resourced and all the rest of it, I had some sleepless nights. I really did. I mean, the pressure was immense. And I'm sure the pressure is no less immense now, but Paul and I know that we have each other's back, and we have a fantastic team around us, and we try to be really kind of open and honest and sort of humble in that way with everyone and say, look, come on, we all need to help each other with this. So, I think partly it's luck. I have had a huge amount of luck in my life to end up in Silicon Valley, to get into the Royal College of Art, to get that job, meet Paul. But hey, you've got to try enough stuff, and lucky does happen.
Similar to our origin story. It's all about chemistry and romance as well.
Absolutely. Here's my work. Here's my work husband. Exactly. We've got the people who are sort of positively oriented. And now what we need to do is have that culture of trial and error. Because we know that mistakes will happen. And so even if you're the most positive people, you can beat yourself down over time. If you don't say, I just did something really stupid. I'm really sorry, guys. But I've learned from it, and I promise you I won't do the same thing. And so, we as senior leaders must model this as well, and constantly be trying to express the kind of behaviours and model behaviours that we think everyone should be doing. So anyway, those are kind of three things I think.
Absolutely. Because that's an interesting thing you say there, because obviously to kind of encourage innovation in people and to encourage that sort of way of thinking is sort of quite an emotional and practical approach. So what do you think, because obviously there's a way in which you can kind of teach some of this in a practical sense, and then from an emotional level, because obviously you can't just give them the tools to do it, you have to
absolutely
give them more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got various thoughts about that, and they come very much from me as designer, and I'll explain them. But again, to be really honest with you, I don't know whether I've quite managed to do that yet with PlusX. Check it out with the team later on, how much they feel we do this. But what I think about is this. I think as a designer, a couple of things. One is for those people that track sort of design theory, there's something the Design Council almost these days is most famous for, which is something called the double diamond. It was something that a former chief design officer before me, Andrea Sjosbok, came up with. You must be very well, right? And basically, what I find useful about it is it merely says, look, there are moments when you want to be sort of creating new ideas and brainstorming is good, and you don't filter, you just want to create sort of expansive kind of thought. And then there are moments when you want to kind of focus things down. Yeah, sure. And I think that first thing is really important. What mode are we in? Are we trying to be positive and just generate lots of ideas and switch off our critical faculties for a bit and then switch them back on? So I think for me, innovation is well known for recognizing that early ideas are fragile ideas. And if you switch on all of your critique day one, your black hat from a sort of Edward the Bono point of view, you'll crush an early idea. So you've got to help people realize that idea generation and then sort of the hardening off of ideas, improving them, must happen in phases. So I think that's still one. And then the second thing I think of when thinking about design process as well is just listen to your customer, because they're the truth, and get out there and make stuff. So if you listen hard, it's not about what you and I think, it's what they're telling us to do, right? Yeah. So always listen to the customer. And then secondly, just stop discussing it, try something out and see whether it works. And it's that empirical sort of thing that works as well. So I think that unlike what lots of people think about design, maybe design with innovation where it's all full of woolly ideas, it's remarkable how much structure you do need in order to give people the confidence then to be free. So it's like, as I often say about sort of in places like this, it's a safe place to do crazy things or a safe place to do dangerous things. You need that structure in order to sort of feel confident enough to release your sort of inner craziness and imaginary stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to have those times where it's good to go divergent and come up with tons of ideas, but also kind of, you can't just come up with ideas forever. You need to be able to have a process in place to structure them and kind of move forward as well.
So I think that's a difficult thing sometimes in organisations where they don't have that person to help nurture them through that journey, and then they have someone who might come in and give them a load of process and things that they need to do to kind of bring in innovation, but actually it's more about nurturing people out within the organisation and taking them on that journey to be able to do it themselves. It's really interesting to say that because one of the things that maybe we'll talk about later is the difference between, let's say, PlusX, our new concept, and what we did initially in supporting startups. But one of the key things is we're trying to offer innovation support, I suppose, to big businesses as well as small businesses. So that's exactly where you get the problems of processes being locked in and culture being restricted. And I think one of the hardest things to do is to give people the confidence, to empower them to try this stuff out for themselves, to have these sort of moments of trial and error, and not to get beaten up for it. And I think that actually it's funny how, if I go back to I remember the internal conversation meetings we had at IDEO, where we said, hey, let's make design thinking a big thing, right? That was like 2005. We had various posters, we had a partners meeting, so I was we had a partners meeting, we were talking about various things. So I remember the moment when Tim Brown and others and David Kelly were sort of saying, let's make this big again. And my God, it's become big. But if the design thinking movement, as it was sort of helped with research post-60 by IDEO, if it failed, often it's because people misunderstood it. And they said, what's the process of design and thinking, right? No, it's not a process, it's a culture. And so absolutely one of the things we hope from every business that might be in our space here is that some of this cultural stuff rubs off. It's sort of the osmosis. Because actually, how to make culture is really hard and it's really slow. And it's not about following process, it's about feeling a very subtle dynamic, but it's very hard to copy. I think.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, I think that's a good point about giving people permission to fail. And then also, one thing I love about Tim Brown, he does a whole lot of play as well, is that kind of introducing that thing of being able to just allow people to just not take everything so seriously and actually just get back to some core fundamentals of being, like when we were all kids, to just play and but
I love
not
your flashback. It was always, when I was a kid, used to have so many ideas. It's true though, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, they're not being judged.
It's all about that.
And I think there's something, I've been, this week, I've worked from home for 2 days, and I've been looking at the world through Zoom, and today I've been in this space. And I know it's going to sound like I've got an agenda here, but I felt like why do I sign up? But honestly, I felt so much more energized here today.
Oh, yeah,
absolutely. People.
When we got back in the same room, it was carnage. It was magical.
So magical.
So it's a really funny world. How do we get this kind of energy? How do we share body language and optimism? And again, this confidence and permission thing is so subtle. So you have to catch it. For me, I remember early on at the design council, I got involved in some mentoring stuff or something. I was always taught about the difference between coaching and mentoring. Coaching is what you do in the moment, like your tennis swing isn't good enough, right? And mentoring is something that's more abstract, almost after the fact, where you can't see what's going on.
Yeah.
And the thing I feel about Zoom is I'm always I might be in a mentoring mode, but I can't coach because I can't see what's going on. Whereas I think when we're in this space here, you could probably feel it a bit more. You could sort of just recognise things going wrong and nudge them a little bit more. So I think especially when we're talking about creative cultures, I really worry if we all think we're going to be doing it from home. So I think that is going to be really tough.
It's true. I mean, I know, I was personally finding it difficult to be able to kind of create that same sense of, like you said, collaboration and being able to look at what people are doing and how they're interacting and still make it an enjoyable experience in a kind of remote setting. I think that is a challenge for a lot of people right now.
And I don't think we've got the digital platforms. I mean, I think that over lockdown, I've had some experience of using new virtual conferencing platforms and virtual collaboration platforms like Miro and Mural and things. And you know, we're sort of saying how these digital platforms are not able to capture by a long shot the subtleties around the human interactions, be it either it's on networking at a conference or dynamic collaboration and keeping that energy going and sort of doing that coaching and learning.
It's funny you bring that up actually, because you might have noticed if you've been online, we had a slight delay at the start today as we kind of got the technology ready. And I think, you know, the thing that I miss personally about people is being able to see other people. So, for instance, when you can see a load of people sat in the room going, what is going on here? Looking, everyone sitting silently and feeling quite awkward. You know, those are the things you don't pick up. If you're doing a remote conference, you can't see all that sort of stuff happening. But I think it is, you know, it's about creating that environment where, you know, it's alright not to get it right the first time. It's better to do something and not get it right the first time. So you can learn from it in a way that we would never have had that information or have that kind of experience to fall back on. So like next time, you know, that we can just just cats on the screen, much more free stuff to give away, and other things like that. But I think that's yeah, maybe if we're doing 5 more minutes, it might be a lot. I think that's it. It's creating that space to be able to work with people.
Yeah. And I think also that if the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us anything, is that we recognise the need for businesses to be agile and innovative. I mean, as I was sort of saying earlier, even if there's sort of short-term challenge for us in launching this particular building now, we know there's a longer-term goal remains true. Businesses must become more digital, more agile, more innovative, and we've got to understand how that actually happens. And again, coming back to the failure mode of the design thinking sort of spiel, is when it gets put in books and in processes and everything else, and it isn't actually an attitudinal cultural. It isn't expressed as an attitudinal cultural thing, which it really is. It's a mindset.
I mean, we could talk far too long about that.
Far too long.
Me and John can talk to you about design doing against design.
That's it. Well, I'm going to shut that down.
Good.
Change that. So I'm interested in that you mentioned about Silicon Valley and London being kind of hubs of innovation before. So obviously, when people think of places that are doing really innovative things, where those companies come from, they're usually the kind of post-child kind of places. So how important do you think location is when you're kind of creating a cultural innovation around the space?
I think it's incredibly important. I mean, if just for a moment we sort of go back to sort of what's wrong with Silicon Valley or London or something, sort of a couple of things. I mean, I think that the reason why so much innovation was happening in Silicon Valley is that's where everyone was. And then we expanded and there were enough people in London. So as the economists call it, there's an agglomeration effect, right? It's enough ideas and enough people in a space. And you do need that density, that richness for things to be riffing off one another. But of course, as many people comment now, the problem with Silicon Valley is it's very monocultural. So we recognise that in terms of many innovations coming out of Silicon Valley, sort of having a particular mindset and a particular way of working doesn't feel like it's got enough diversity to it. So I think also, as software eats the world, we realise that we must have diverse people and perspectives fueling innovation. Otherwise, innovation, the results of innovation, the fruits of innovation will just be offered a tangent. It'll be really weird and really kind of young blokey, right? We don't want that. So actually, the fundamental question, the point for me is not just that there's some kind of sense of social justice in innovators almost wherever they are being supported to grow. Talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. That sort of mantra. But also, actually, we as a global society will not have the innovation we deserve and need if we don't have diversity in our gene pool of innovators. So I think that's sort of the main thing for me that's really important. And for me, what I'm fascinated to understand over the next 5 years, let's say, is as we begin to build our innovation network, let's say, hopefully in Manchester and Birmingham, Southampton and here and sort of the various places we're talking to, I'm really fascinated to really understand what those substances will be like. We all know that Brighton has a very strong DNA, and that's really exciting because it means that, it will cause innovations to happen that are sort of quite unusually Brightonian in their worldview. But let's take something really common like the zero carbon challenge. If we imagine sort of zero carbon innovations in Manchester, they might be quite different from the zero carbon innovations in Brighton. We've had some fantastic circular economy things here. We've got people making novel biomaterials, turning fish waste and algae into bioplastics. I think that Brighton will have a very different sense, let's say, than Manchester. Manchester may be making amazing machines for sucking carbon dioxide out of the air. Brighton may do that too, I don't know. But I think that's why I'm excited by that again, we're going to see diverse solutions to common problems, but each innovation cluster is going to contribute something unique and different.
It's especially helpful, isn't it? Because they have the Silicon Roundabout where tech hub has just gone there, and that traffic and stays there. Everyone came into this area, and instead of creating an area of innovation, although there was innovation that came out of it, what it actually created was this area for developers to put up skyscrapers and charge a huge amount of money.
I think that's really interesting, and I think absolutely I was sort of reading a wide article about that recently, and I think that one of the things I'm new to the world of regeneration. Like if there was a word I had to look up before my design council job, there's a word I had to look up before this job, which is regeneration. And I think that when people talk about regeneration, they go, it's a way for developers to make lots of money out of buildings. And obviously there's another word that's often used, which is gentrification, which is rich people coming in. And I suppose the one thing that I began to understand from this is that ultimately what we want is, again, diversity. Diverse communities are strong communities. And we could argue that, in quotes, as policymakers might say, left behind communities that feel they're not getting their fair share of good jobs and all the rest of it, are not diverse enough because they don't have some people who are confident about making great businesses in there. So let's increase the diversity, let's say, of what's going on in Wolscombe. Great. But of course, what happens so often, especially in the private sector, what happens is you overshoot. And what happens is you then end up dominating, let's say, the housing stock, that's the gentrification bit, with rich people who pull all the assets away from the people who lived there beforehand. And it's a similar thing in terms of Shoreditch and Silicon Roundabout. So many people piled in that then it did become an act of property speculation. And by definition, the rents shot up, and maybe the startup didn't own the buildings, and so then they get squeezed out. So I think there is a really big question for me more in the midterm, which is how do we make the positive stuff happen, which is diversifying the networks and the talent pool of any location without overshooting and causing it then to be dominated by outsiders, let's say, and the people who we were meant to be supporting in the first place get squeezed out somehow. And obviously that's a dynamic that's existed, let's say, within the Brighton housing stock for some time. I'm sure lots of debate about down from London or not. So I think this is something where we all have to be very aware of that. I don't know what the answers are, but I think at the very least we're mindful of the needs to maintain the sense of diversity to create these kind of healthy local economic communities that we're trying to make.
So you sort of mentioned earlier, obviously, as everyone knows, we're going through a bit of a tough time at the moment. How did you ensure that the business model was resilient enough when you started PlusX?
Really, really important. So when Paul and I got together to sort of, we spent actually, I think it was up to a year, really analysing this prototype called the Central Research Laboratory to take the bits that were exciting, but to resolve the bits that were problematic. There were a couple of things. So I think one is, let's say, Central Research Laboratory was 10,000 square feet just supporting small businesses. Now, purely from an economic point of view, 10,000 square feet, let's say 100 people in it. From a pure sort of operational point of view, you still need about the same number of staff as you might need for a space 3 times the size, because you just got to have a certain amount of kind of feet on the ground.
Yeah, sure.
So you've got to have a bigger scale than just supporting 100 people at a time. The second thing is, have you got a resilient business if you're just supporting startups? The answer is probably not. Love startups, wonderful people, lots of ideas, not a lot of money.
Yeah.
So again, that's an economic problem. So it really hits our kind of our social mission or our sort of structural mission, but it's not very economically resilient. So actually, when we were first considering this building with you and I, they were saying, well, why didn't you take the bottom third? And I went, no, that's not going to work. We need the whole thing. So this is 50,000 square feet, big enough for 600 people. But it's not that we're going to have 600 startup entrepreneurs in here. We've got the big, the medium, and the small. So actually, the top two floors, we're inviting bigger, more resilient businesses that want to take a 5-year or a 10-year lease. So they might be like a corporate multinational who want innovation. So they're sort of they are mature as a business, but what they seek is innovation. The scale-ups maybe in the middle of the building, so sort of 3/3 here, the top third of more financially safe businesses, the ones that lack innovation. They want to speak to the scale-ups maybe in the middle. Maybe those are the ones who've got some funding. They're more financially resilient. Now we need to help them to scale up. Really important to right. And then the ground two floors, we've got the early stage startups that need lots of emotional and practical support, but are so resilient economically. So that was the first thing. Bigger scale and a range of types of business that you're trying to get into your space. The second thing was our relationship with the landlords. So it's well known that in the 2007 crash, some of the pioneers of co-working, the Regis brand, IWG and Spaces, they had a big problem. Because if you take a 10-year lease on something, but then you offer 3 months licenses to someone, in a crash, they will leave, you're left with a liability. So it's a pretty straightforward problem. Never get sandwiched, never get left holding the liability. So what we said instead, and this is where you and I are sort of strategic partners, so we're saying, well, look, we're in the business for Regeneration here. Over time, over a 10-year period, this whole thing from a sort of building and regeneration point of view, and from a property development point of view, is going to give you your money back. So what you need to do is have a management agreement with us. So actually, we run this building like many sort of hotel groups do. We don't take the liability, we share the risk and we share the reward. So ultimately, so we're sharing with the landlord. And then the final thing we did, so that fundamental operating model we will sort of pursue in all of our locations. But it has to be about that longer term win-win for both sides. And then the final thing I think is simply about actually our collaboration with government. We have always been an organisation, both the Central Research Laboratory and here at PlusX, where we just launched our sort of £10.5 million government-supported business support programme, of using government funds. Now, not everyone understands the role of government in innovation. People who really understand the world of innovation recognise that, be it NASA or DARPANET that created the internet, the American government has absolutely been fundamental in the creation of Silicon Valley, frankly, as well as so many of the American innovations that exist now. So government is fundamentally important. And when you think about it, government is counter-cyclical. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, is a great example of this. When the commercial economy goes down, what does the government do? It goes up. Yeah. So for a conservative government to be putting the amount of money into the system that it is now, that's incredibly important. So as soon as COVID-19 hit, as soon as lockdown hit, our government programs, we're on the phone to them. And of course they were going, right, what can we do to help you support businesses, right? So there we go. Those are some of the things we put in place. So, as I said, it took Paul and me with lots of advice and others, a year, 18 months to put that together, but we do feel it was pretty important. Because again, if there's one thing I learned at the Design Council, it was how hard it is to really create purposeful businesses. Charities are amazing because they have great purpose and people kind of give them money to make it happen. And the commercial world sometimes struggles with its sense of social impact and purpose, like we discussed, but my God, they've got an economic engine. And it turns out it's really, really hard to blend those two worlds. And so I think that's, again, coming back to your earlier question, we're using every single thing I've learned and Paul's learned to create a system that can carry on having its sense of purpose, this sort of long-term regenerative effect, while surviving these sorts of ups and downs that we all experience.
My eyebrows almost exploded on my face. I was just first purpose standpoint of view. I don't think we try and really have that purpose. It's kind of what we try and work with people and organisations to understand. But I think That's one of the things that attracted us here, is that there's kind of a clear purpose of what we're trying to do in the city, but also that kind of, you use the word building confidence and emotional support of smaller companies, and I think from my experience of being in London and seeing companies like WeWork and other places like that, that's the thing that they don't have. So get them in, get the money, and
yes. And I think what's so interesting about that and so challenging is that we can all have purpose at the beginning. This is what we're going to do. And the general feeling I have is that what happens, your purpose gets bent over time. So as soon as WeWork has to scale up and SoftBank is saying, right, go for scale, then, okay, now my purpose is different. Now my purpose is world domination rather than sort of helping these fledgling businesses. And so this is exactly where the B Corp comes in. So some people may be familiar with this idea of the B Corp Benefits Corp, and it's where you begin to sort of write down in your sort of articles of association or structures. We are never going to extract lots of money out of the business in order to succeed, or indeed it's just sort of dealing with this issue that often, with the best will in the world, it's the investment coming in that, again, for the best reasons, immediate economic reward that begins to skew your purpose. And so this is why business models are important. Now, we're not a B Corp, we may become it in the future, we've considered it. But for me, if I've learned anything as a designer over 25 years, it's that business models really matter. And so ultimately, I think that, again, we may talk to pension funds in the future in order to help us to sort of acquire buildings and to have our purpose. And I always use the examples of pension funds, because pension funds are really important sort of asset managers, right? They are holding the security for our later life. So no one can argue that a pension fund shouldn't be sort of giving me my money back and more, because if I don't have money, I'm going to be destitute. Right? And yet at the same time, if we're using that, so because we often struggle with this idea of, I want my money, I want my economic return. Is that evil? It's like, well, no, we all need to live. We all need to feed ourselves and clothe our family, all the rest of it. And pension funds are a great example of where they themselves would need the economic return. So I suppose, again, aided by Paul's knowledge especially, but through my experience of looking at the world of social impact and different business models, that's why we've structured the way we are. And I would hope that we can help purposeful businesses understand how to structure themselves from an organizational, a governance, and a business model point of view. Because otherwise, again, it's naive to think you can maintain your purpose as you grow, especially if ownership, and that's often financial investment changes. Watch this space. Our job is to scale up and maintain our purpose. That's the challenge.
That's good. But I don't think that's a good challenge to have as long as you've got so it's kind of clear and focused. Look, I think we can keep talking for ages. I know we have a few more questions, but we were going to try and open it up to people in the room and potentially people online. If anyone has any questions for Matt, please raise your hand. There's one. Oh.
Yeah, I really love that statement. Diverse communities are strong communities, and we definitely have a bit of an issue with rising diversity. I do completely agree. It does feel like we have just one gene pool here. Love the idea of bringing together innovation groups throughout the UK and do something with the gene pool here. Do you see any challenges bringing together those different groups who are both naturally work together? You've got a unique opportunity to really bring some of that down here.
Yes, I should explain actually. I think I was listening to Ed Miliband's podcast, which is a great one, Reasons to be Cheerful, where they were talking about regeneration, and that's where I understood about diversity. So that's where I got that bit of knowledge from. Right? But look, I think that, we again want to be that kind of positive force of energy, to sort of say to people, trust one another, as I was saying earlier to that question about how you build a collaborative community. And I think that it can always be hard to get those entities in any innovation kind of ecosystem to sort of trust one another. But ultimately, again, we've been collaborating with entities like TechNation as well, who've also got a great overview. Elizabeth Course, who's the sort of the connector in the southeast, is fantastic and is so excited by this cluster. And I think that, again, I think what we need to do is bring lots of exciting national and global people together. It's all about people recognising that Brighton is a world-class place to do stuff. And just sort of bring more people together with a great spirit of positivity, just trying to blast through any sense of reserve. And maybe again, set ourselves a bit of a goal. I think that's, if there's one thing that's really on my to-do list, which I've not sort of made any progress on yet, personally, but I know it's happening, is how do we set up Brighton to be, let's say, the best place to do zero carbon work? You know, I know that of all the sort of local authorities, you know, Brighton City Council has got circular economy at the heart of their strategy. So let's all set ourselves a really big mutual goal, whatever that is, and then let's all come together and achieve it. And I think that's what we need to do maybe, is just be a bit clearer what our mutual goals are, and then assemble, you know, Avengers Assemble.
Avengers, I was about to say, yes. Have we got any more questions?
Is there some benefit of being in the same space as one another to keep the company running?
Yeah, maybe I should repeat that question. Probably, yeah. So the benefit of people being in the same space to drive the company forward. I mean, yes, I think I kind of alluded to earlier because I have a bit of an agenda. But I can honestly say, I try very hard to be objective. I can honestly say, yes. I mean, you know, today being in the building, I feel, you know, energized and connected being with people. And so often over the past 4 months, or whatever it is now, I felt more drained actually, having to strain to understand people and be understood through that window that we look at these days. And I think that so much of driving companies forward and being excellent is just subtle. I mean, like the difference between success and failure is so subtle. There's been so much written over the years, I think, about, it's a strange segue, but with cystic fibrosis, there was a really excellent article in the New Yorker about the subtle differences between adding decades of life to young people with cystic fibrosis by either giving them the proper therapy or not. And you realise that the difference between wild success and failure can often come down to a very few number of things you've got to recognise and do right. So I think maybe that's the worry about all of this, is that people are not recognising the very subtle but very important things about connecting a team, energising it, focusing it, moving it forward, coaching it, making it feel confident and happy. You know, and almost the worry is that some of these leading companies like Google, like Twitter, have said, oh, we don't need to come back. And so many will look to them, especially Google, who's saying they're not coming back till next year. And we'll look to them as vibrant cultures and go, well, if it's good enough for Google, it's good enough for me. So I think in some ways that's what I worry about at the moment, is the signals being sent by some of those sort of venerable companies that actually physical space doesn't matter. And I think that's probably missing quite a big trick.
No, absolutely. I think, as I said earlier, we can take back rather than being in the same room. Because we started back over lockdown, didn't we? Like, we were just due to launch it about 2 weeks before going to a big conference and doing a big event and stuff. And we all had to stay home for 3 months and try and talk to each other about this business where, oh, we're going to get people together and it's going to be, you know, it's going to be great and we'll make them do all these things and, you know, they're going to love it. And trying to imagine that down a Zoom phone call is, it's almost like it doesn't happen if it's on Zoom. You know, it's that physical experience.
Yeah, I think even from like a mental health perspective, it's very challenging to be constantly at home, shielded from everyone, particularly if you live on the road. And so there's definitely something that comes from just being in the company. And even when it comes to innovation and ideas and stuff like that,
Smells, the sounds.
We bounce off people and you know, and I
experience.
don't think you get that same feeling on an online environment.
We're really committed to health and wellbeing. It's a central thing. Again, if Platinum Wired Score is one of our goals here, Platinum Well 2.0 California standard is also what we're heading towards. And you know, we've been surveying our team over lockdown as well, and there's definitely some stress in the system. And what I want to work on with our team is absolutely how might we find that being in the space makes us feel better, able to separate home lives and work lives, to talk about our stresses, to help everyone empathise more with our feeling of overload or whatever it is. So I think that health and wellbeing is such an important actually about space that I have spoken with someone about in the past couple of weeks, which is interesting, was about saying we are absolutely going to see a change in the role of space for some companies, though. So someone said it quite nicely as a sort of almost slightly simplistic thing, which is, okay, if we all used to get into the office on a daily basis to do our work, we used to do that high energy stuff on an off-site, right? And now what we're going to do is do our kind of normal work at home and come into the office for the high energy stuff, right? So I think that we're not going to be doing the high energy connected stuff 5 days a week. I'm sure we're going to see plenty of home working, a few days a week, and that's going to be great. But it's sort of when you do need to create the energy stuff and you do need to get together, how are you going to do that? And so I think clearly we're not all saying it's all going to go back to the way it was, but to miss a trick by saying everyone stay at home forevermore, that's definitely wrong. I mean, almost 100%.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Yeah. Right. Anything else?
We had another question come in. How important is cognitive diversity?
Cognitive diversity, how important is it in the community? Yeah, I think again, I think it's really powerful because so much in the world of diversity, be we talking socioeconomic background, race, age, cognitive diversity. I'm sure a lot of lip services pay for it, where people say, okay, lip service, and then some people would say it's a social justice matter, it's the right thing to do. But actually, I think even better than that, I always feel we need so many different types of evidence. People are really seeing that high performance teams and good innovation requires that diversity of perspective. Because again, if we don't have a diversity of perspective, we know that we're going to be missing things. So I think that's almost the most exciting thing. We've got several different moral and but also sort of evidence-based data, evidence bases now, that really suggests that if your goal is innovation, and if your goal is to build a resilient company, you absolutely need that range. And I think obviously with cognitive diversity, often one of the ways in which people think about things is around things like perhaps dyslexia or dyspraxia or even sort of Asperger's or autism, but there are others as well. So I think cognitive diversity has so many different meanings, but I think that when I think about it, it is about both attracting people in with different backgrounds and perspectives. But if we are talking specifically about some of those conditions that I've spoken about, actually the responsibility for the employer is to provide the solutions that work for them. And that again is maybe the opportunity now. There are so many different ways of working, and some people need peace and quiet, and some people want loads of noise. I mean, one of the classic sort of areas of diversity was around extroverts versus introvert. I'm rather more introvert than I am extrovert, a bit borderline, but I often need huge amounts of moments like this up on stage. But I need that sort of concentration time. So again, I think the great opportunity now is to provide more customizable work experiences for people, so that we can get the best out of them. So job one is to recruit them, but job two, very close behind, is to provide the infrastructure and the methods by which you can bring them together. Because it's all very well saying, I want to recruit diverse in a diverse way, but if you're not making everyone feel confident, trusting, able to do their best, then it's all going to fall apart pretty soon.
Yeah, I think it feeds back into the point you were making about not gentrifying an area too much, making sure that you're engaging the wider community, getting people from different backgrounds to think together, and even just the different regions that you're thinking of setting up hubs and stuff like that. Making sure, like you say, like Brighton compared to Manchester or somewhere else, probably going to be quite cognitively different. In the way that we think and the kind of experiences.
Politically, and all those things. Yeah, and that's better. And I think that the more people realise almost the downsides of the innovation that's happened over the past 20 years, there's been some great stuff, but there's clearly been some deficits as well associated with that. That just spurs people on to say, okay, right, the next wave better be different, and we are going to need to do it in a different way. We can't just say to Silicon Valley, you carry on taking responsibility for all the major innovations, just do it a bit better, could you? That's not going to happen.
Awesome.
Cool.
How are we doing for questions?
How are we doing for time?
Time.
one more.
Where do you see PlusX in 10 years' time?
Thank you, Katie. Where do you see PlusX in 10 years' time? So that was really interesting. It's a really interesting question because I asked that of someone in an interview when I was interviewing them last week or the week before. And they said, and so I'm going to steal their answer. This is Sam Garrity from Rockingham. He said, I can't think in 10 years, but I can do 3, but phases of 3. And I think that absolutely we can really see that in the next 3 years we're going to be absolutely kind of proving the concept, really getting the evidence around what we're able to do, and do it in sort of a few locations. We're going to be building that pipeline. But ultimately, frankly, in 10 years, we want to see tens of these things, both in this country and abroad. I mean, again, it's an interesting one that people often ask, when you're starting a business, what do you need to do? And I think one of the things you need to do is decide, well, do I have any limits on how big I think this is going to be? And, I don't think either Paul or I are interested in world domination for the sense of kind of wanting to feel powerful. But if we're right, if this is good for people, and if the people that we work with really benefit from this, let's do more. So I think that's the thing for us. The more we've been doing this 5 years so far in its entirety since the beginning of the Central Research Laboratory, and we've got now early stage businesses that were started by graduates back then, valued at millions of pounds, raising millions of pounds, and that's just one metric. There's an expression of the exciting stuff they're doing in reusable batteries and sort of circular economy for batteries, robotics, novel materials. And I always think that the world of startups is alchemy. It's amazing. I mean, where the hell do these ideas come from? Where do these people come from? And how do they turn them into amazing things?
Shower.
And
Always in the shower.
it's the best
You had one the other day, didn't you?
But the best bit is it can happen here. Why should it be Zuckerberg?
Actually, you've got
Why should
ten
we
showers upstairs as well.
So hopefully, as you can tell, I find it energizing. It is so energizing to be doing this stuff, to be seeing these amazing people do amazing things, and that just becomes the engine, really, where you just want to see it happen for more people. So yeah, 10 years, it's going to be big, but not because we want the glory. It's because we want everyone else to have the glory.
Awesome. That's a good finish.
I think that's a great way to finish.
Awesome. Okay, so I think that kind of draws us to a close today. Thank you very much, Matt, for being our guest. Thank you. Our first live, thank you to everyone. I was getting to that. Thank you to everyone who's come along and been very patient with us while we go through a few technical hitches. And
everyone who's joined us online as well.
Yeah, everyone who's joined us online. Hi, John. Hi to my mum. Things down. Yeah, it's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully you guys have too. So yeah, check out PlusX. PlusX.space is the URL, and yeah, please like and subscribe to the podcast as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cool. Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is this the awkward fade out now? Take all free stuff. You can even take free stuff to the room.